Before neon signs and jukeboxes, before whiskey came in branded bottles and bar stools had backs, there were saloons, dusty, dim, and alive with the hum of the frontier. The air smelled of tobacco, leather, and frying grease. Piano keys clinked beneath the roar of poker laughter, and behind the counter, a cook worked magic over a wood stove that never went cold. These weren't fine dining halls. They were the heart of the West. A man could walk in hungry, broke, or broken, and leave with a full belly and a bit of spirit back in him. Tonight, we're remembering those long-forgotten dishes, the flavors that once fed cowboys, miners, gamblers, and drifters when the West was still wild. Beans and salt pork. If there was one dish that defined the West, it was beans, the heartbeat of every campfire and saloon kitchen. Pinto, navy, kidney, it didn't matter. They all ended up in the same blackened pot, bubbling slow beside the stove while the night wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Salt pork or bacon ends gave them life, smoky, rich, and heavy with the taste of survival. The smell drifted through town, wrapping around poker tables and saddle racks alike, calling cowboys in from the cold. Hours passed before the beans softened just right, creamy, tender, with that deep, meaty flavor only patience could buy. Served in tin bowls with a chunk of bread or biscuit, they weren't fancy, but they filled more than bellies. They filled silence, miles, and the empty spaces of the West. Cowboys called it saddle soup. Everyone else just called it dinner. A humble miracle made of beans, fire, and endurance. Son of a gun stew. A legend born from cattle drives and the endless hunger of men too far from home. Son of a gun stew wasn't planned. It was created by necessity and courage. Whatever the cook could find went into the pot. Beef scraps, onions, potatoes, and sometimes organs, heart, kidney, or tripe if that's what the ranch had left. The smell alone could draw every cowboy in from the line, the promise of warmth cutting through the dust and fatigue. By nightfall, the stew turned thick and rich, a dark, smoky blend of flavors that tasted far better than it had any right to. Served with black coffee, hard bread, and maybe a curse or two, it became the unofficial feast of the frontier. No rules, no recipes, just survival seasoned with salt and pride. It proved one truth of the West. Even in the harshest land, a man could eat like a king if he had a pot, a fire, and a little imagination. Buffalo steak. Before cattle ruled the plains, buffalo did, and their meat carried the spirit of the frontier. Lean, wild, and muscled from roaming the open prairie, it hit the skillet like thunder. Saloons prided themselves on serving it rare, seared hard over open flame, smoky on the outside, bleeding heart red within. The scent of buffalo steak could silence a room faster than a sheriff's gun. Men would lean back, forks ready, watching the fat hiss and spark as it cooked. The first bite was always the same, wild, powerful, tasting of dust, grass, and freedom. For travelers and outlaws alike, buffalo wasn't just meat, it was memory, a taste of the untamed land they were trying so hard to conquer. It fed the strong, humbled the weak, and left everyone craving more. Sourdough biscuits. Every good cook kept a sourdough starter alive like a pet, fed daily, guarded like gold, and carried in a covered jar from camp to camp. Out of it came the biscuits that softened the West's hard edges. Tangy, flaky, and golden from the skillet, they were the pride of any saloon breakfast. The dough hissed when it hit the hot iron, rising slow under the wood smoke air. Crack one open, and steam poured out, carrying the smell of butter, yeast, and comfort. Cowboys dunked them in gravy thick with drippings. Miners spread them with honey or molasses. and gamblers tore them apart with bare hands between hands of poker. In a world built on grit and gunpowder, sourdough biscuits were mercy on a plate, soft, warm proof that the frontier still had room for tenderness. They weren't just food, they were forgiveness baked into bread. Coffee and red-eye gravy. When the whiskey ran out, coffee stayed, thick, black, and bitter enough to wake the dead. It wasn't brewed for flavor. It was boiled in iron pots until it could hold a spoon upright. Cowboys drank it before dawn, gamblers sipped it through the night, and barkeeps poured it for anyone sober enough to ask. It was the West's constant companion, hot, dark, and honest. Out of that same coffee came one of the frontier's strangest treasures, red-eye gravy. A few spoonfuls of strong brew mixed with bacon grease and skillet drippings, stirred until glossy and brown. Poured over biscuits or ham, it shimmered with oil and smelled of salt and smoke. Breakfast wasn't a meal back then. It was fuel, and this was octane. The bitter coffee bite, the fatty salt of the gravy, the crunch of biscuit crust. Together, they reminded a man that even after sleepless nights and hard rides, he could still find something worth getting up for: fried catfish. From the muddy rivers of Texas to the clear creeks of Montana, catfish was the poor man's gold, plentiful, forgiving, and delicious when done right. Settlers would haul them in by lantern light, their slick bodies shining in the dusk. By morning, the saloon cook had them dredged in cornmeal, pepper, and salt, then dropped into hot lard until the crust turned the color of prairie dust. The smell, rich, crisp, and smoky, drew men from poker tables and porches alike. Served on tin plates with lemon wedges, or a dash of hot sauce if you were lucky, fried catfish carried a taste of the South into the western frontier. It was Sunday comfort on a weekday wage, proof that good food didn't need refinement, only fire, patience, and hunger. The crunch of the crust, the tender white meat beneath. Every bite was a reminder that even rough men could still crave something clean, simple, and good. Venison jerky. Tough times made tough snacks. Venison jerky was the West's version of a pocket meal, lean, dry, and hard as the boots that carried it. Hunters and trappers smoked their kills for hours over mesquite fires, slicing the meat thin and salting it heavy so it'd last through the long months of dust and cold. Every saloon kept a jar behind the bar, a trade good as common as whiskey and as necessary as bullets. A strip of jerky could last half a poker hand, sometimes two. The first chew was always work, rough, sinewy, like gnawing on the land itself, but once it softened, the flavor was pure smoke and memory. It was more than a snack, it was insurance. Out on the trail, that same jerky kept cowboys alive when nothing else did. It was the taste of endurance, a meal that didn't spoil, didn't quit, and didn't apologize. Prairie oysters. Not seafood, though the name fooled more than a few tenderfoots. Prairie oysters came from the bull, not the sea, a delicacy born from necessity and courage. Cooks would slice, peel, and fry the bull-calf testicles in a heavy pan until they turned golden and crisp, the smell equal parts shocking and inviting. Cowboys swore by them for strength, laughing through mouthfuls as they dared newcomers to try a bite. For the uninitiated, it was half prank, half initiation, the taste of belonging earned through bravery and a strong stomach. In every real saloon west of the Missouri, there was a story of the man who turned pale halfway through his first prairie oyster, and the old-timers who never let him forget it. But for those who could stomach it, they were rich, nutty, and tender, proof that the West wasted nothing and feared even less. Out there, if it could be cooked, it could be conquered, and prairie oysters were a badge of both appetite and audacity. Corn pone, cornmeal, water, and salt. Three humble ingredients that built the backbone of frontier bread. There was nothing fancy about it, and that was the beauty. Out on the trail, if you didn't have a skillet, you baked it right on a shovel held over the fire, watching the edges brown under the open sky. Sometimes a cook would add a drizzle of bacon grease for flavor, or a splash of milk if the herd was nearby and generous. The result was dense, crusty, and a little smoky. Bread that didn't crumble under hard times. It went with everything: beans, stew, salt pork, or whiskey when the night got long. Corn pone wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to endure. Each bite was a quiet reminder that the West was built on simplicity, grit, and the kind of hunger that could make even a slab of cornmeal taste like comfort. Chuckwagon chili. Before chili came in cans, it came in cauldrons the size of dreams. On the open range, the chuckwagon cook ruled like a king, his pot bubbling from dawn till dusk with hunks of beef, dried chilies, onions, and garlic. Each ingredient told a story: the chilies from Mexico, the beef from the trail, the onions from whatever town they'd passed through last. Some cooks added coffee or beer for body. Others tossed in scraps of biscuit or bacon grease just to make it richer. When it was done, it was thick enough to stand a spoon in, smoky enough to sting the eyes, and hot enough to burn away the memory of a bad day. Served with cornbread or a tin cup of black coffee, it was fire and comfort in one bite. Around the wagon, men leaned in close, faces glowing in the firelight, sharing stories between mouthfuls. Chuckwagon chili wasn't just food. It was fellowship, brewed in cast iron and bound by the dust of the trail. Ham hock and cabbage. For miners, settlers, and anyone scraping by, ham hock and cabbage was both meal and medicine. The hock, the rough, meaty joint of the pig, gave up its flavor slow, turning plain cabbage into something smoky and rich. Everything went into one pot: water, meat, salt, and maybe a potato or two if you had them. It boiled for hours, filling the air with a scent that could cut through the damp chill of a mountain shack. Saloons served it cheap, and nobody complained. It filled bellies, cleared sinuses, and stretched lean times into something that felt like plenty. The cabbage turned tender and sweet, the broth salty and full of life. A poor man's feast, dressed in steam and gratitude. Out west, thrift was an art, and this dish was its masterpiece. Proof that even scraps could taste noble when cooked with patience and pride. Johnny cakes. Half pancake, half bread, and pure frontier soul. Johnny cakes were the sunrise on a plate. Made of cornmeal, water, and a bit of fat, they were fried right in bacon grease until their edges crisped to gold. The smell alone could drag a tired cowboy out of bed faster than any rooster. Sometimes, if luck or kindness struck, a spoon of molasses sweetened the batter, turning breakfast into something close to heaven. But even plain, a Johnny cake hit the spot, soft inside, crisp outside, warm through and through. Served with coffee, eggs, or just a smear of butter, it reminded folks that joy didn't need sugar, only heat, hunger, and heart. On the trail or in town, a stack of Johnny cakes was a promise kept, that no matter how rough the morning, something good was waiting in the skillet. Smoked trout high in the mountain towns where the air was thin and the river sang cold. Smoked trout was more than food, it was pride. Fishermen rose before dawn, lines cast into fog-covered streams, pulling silver flashes from the current. By midday, the saloon cook had them cleaned, salted, and laid over hickory smoke until the flesh turned pink and tender. The smell drifted through the streets. Wood, salt, and fresh water blended into something holy. Served on a tin plate beside a square of cornbread or fried potatoes, the fish flaked apart at the touch of a fork. Every bite carried the taste of mountain air, river stone, and wood fire. Travelers swore it was the best thing they'd eaten in weeks. Light, clean, and alive with the wild. Smoked trout wasn't just a meal, it was the spirit of the frontier itself. Simple, pure, and earned one cast at a time. Rabbit stew game was dinner, if you could catch it. Rabbit stew, tender meat with carrots, onions, and herbs, was the meal that bridged hunger and hope. It was humble, nourishing, and tasted of the wild hills themselves. Wild turkey roast. When holidays came, or when the poker table was kind, saloons roasted wild turkey, stuffed with herbs and onions, basted in its own fat. It was the closest thing to luxury west of the Mississippi. Oxtail soup. A dish of patience and reward. Boiled oxtails, onions, and root vegetables simmered all day until the broth turned rich and thick. Saloons served it to travelers who'd been riding for days. One bowl, and the road felt a little shorter. Pickled eggs. There was a jar on every bar top, sometimes cloudy, sometimes clear, always waiting. The eggs floated like pale moons in their tangy brine, glowing pink if a few beets had been thrown in for color. They were a fixture of the West, standing guard beside the whiskey bottles, catching dust and sunlight in equal measure. Men would slam a shot, grab an egg with 2 fingers, and bite down. Vinegar stinging the tongue, the soft white giving way to a firm yolk that tasted like fire and grit. Some swore they settled the stomach after a night of drinking. Others said they just made you thirsty for another round. No one really knew who started the tradition. Maybe an old barkeep from the East, maybe a German settler who missed home. But soon every saloon from Deadwood to Tombstone had them. They were cheap, filling, and lasted forever. The perfect companion for men who didn't. Tangy, firm, and unforgettable, those eggs weren't just food. They were the West's answer to fast food. Served straight from the jar, no questions asked. Salted cod and potatoes. Before cattle reigned supreme, the West dined on whatever wandered in from the coast. Salted cod, stiff as bark, packed in barrels from Boston or San Francisco, was a miracle of preservation. Miners and traders soaked it for hours, washing away the sea, softening it just enough to fry with onions and a touch of lard. The kitchen would fill with a smell sharp enough to wake the dead, and before long, plates of flaky fish sat steaming beside mounds of boiled potatoes slicked in butter. It was a working man's meal, heavy, salty, and honest. For sailors turned settlers, it was the taste of home. For everyone else, it was proof that civilization still reached this far. Saloons served it when they could get it, often on Fridays, with black coffee or beer to wash it down. The cod crumbled, the potatoes soothed, and together they made sense of hunger. Simple, greasy, comforting. It was the kind of meal that reminded you that the West wasn't just wilderness. It was a place still learning how to eat like the world it left behind. Apple Brown Betty. Even the roughest towns needed sweetness, and Apple Brown Betty delivered it with humble grace. No fancy crust, no delicate pastry, just layers of sliced apples, brown sugar, butter, and crumbs stacked in a cast iron pan. The scent alone could quiet a saloon. Apples softened into syrupy gold, while the topping baked crisp and brown, turning sugar and butter into a caramelized crown. When it came bubbling from the oven, men lined up, spoons in hand, grinning like schoolboys. Some poured a splash of whiskey or cream over their serving, watching it hiss and melt into the warm fruit. Others just ate it straight, hot enough to burn but too good to wait. It was the dessert of the self-made. No measure, no recipe, just instinct and a bit of luck. In the clatter and chaos of frontier life, Apple Brown Betty was gentleness in a tin pan, a reminder that even outlaws had a sweet tooth, and that sometimes the simplest things, baked with patience and heart, could taste like home. Bread pudding with whiskey sauce. No food went to waste in the West. Out there, everything had a second life, even bread gone hard as saddle leather. What others might have thrown away, frontier cooks turned into gold. They'd slice it up, soak it slow in milk and sugar, let it soften again under the promise of warmth. Eggs went in next, sometimes a handful of raisins or chopped apples if fortune was kind, maybe a dash of cinnamon borrowed from the trading post. The smell that rose from that battered tin pan was enough to make even the roughest drifter pause, sweet, smoky, alive with memory. When topped with whiskey sauce, thick, boozy, and warm, it became more than dessert. The sauce hissed when it hit the bread, melting into every crease, releasing a steam that carried vanilla and sin in equal measure. It wasn't elegant, but it was honest, the kind of sweetness that tasted like mercy after a long ride. Around the saloon stove, men would lean in quiet, spoons scraping the last soft corners from the pan, letting the heat and whiskey remind them that even out here, far from home, comfort could still be found, baked, bubbling, and made from nothing but scraps and hope. The Wild West wasn't polished, and neither was its food. But that was the beauty of it. Every dish told a story of grit, hunger, and invention. Of men and women who made do with what they had and made it taste like home. These recipes may have vanished from our plates, but not from the dust, the smoke, or the memory of the open frontier, because the flavor of the West was never about perfection. It was about survival, shared over a wooden table, one tin plate at a time.